Style is an interesting concept. Take this building, for example. It's pretty different. It may not be to everyone's tastes. It could really be all red bricks and right angles and still fulfil its purpose. But if you're not really into buildings and still want to make a statement, then the Mercedes-Benz GLE Coupe might be just the thing for you. And there's arguably style there, and with a 3-litre turbo diesel V6 under the bonnet, there's some substance as well. But is it a case of form leading function? Well, let's find out. The GLE Coupe is part of a twin-pronged attack by Mercedes to boost sales in the large luxury SUV segment. Like the BMW X5 and X6 twins, the ML replacing GLE wagon and its coupe sibling here may share the same underpinnings and interior components, but that's about it. Well, the coupe's got a completely different look to the wagon. It's actually longer, wider and lower. Now, it might not be to everyone's taste, but you do have some pretty smart details. You've got these great LED taillights, a standard AMG kit and those massive 21 by 11 inch wheels. Okay, you know, from kind of there, it can look a little bit goofy, but I really like it and it definitely turns heads. But can you live with it? Well, space-wise, the GLE Coupe is still a really big car. The sloping roofline does make it feel a little bit more snug than the wagon, but there's still excellent room. You sort of sit low and scooch down, and as you can see, I've still got great headroom, even considering my hair's a bit spiky today, really good toe room, and great knee room with this seat in my driving position. You're well accommodated back here too. There's pockets in the doors, air vents, a couple of cubbies, a 12-volt outlet, a centre armrest with cup holders and access to a ski port. Both outside seats have ISOFIX points. And then these neat hideaway luggage hooks hanging from the roof. Well, back here, the GLE actually holds a world record for cargo volume for a coupe. Must have been a very slow day at Guinness. There's 650 litres of space here that expands to 1720 when you fold the seats down in a 60-40 configuration. Under the floor, there's a space-saver spare tyre, some tools, there's a couple of other cubbies, even a 12-volt outlet around the boot. So the space is actually pretty good. But this hard parcel tray here can get in the way, and if you can have a look, this load lip is extremely high, which means if you ever put the dog in the back, well, poor old Rover's going to need a stepladder to get in there. Well, up here, it's basically the same as the GLE wagon. Front and centre, you get the new command control interface and high-resolution 8-inch screen. Now, if you haven't used Command, the software is actually pretty cool. Aside from the obvious telephony and navigation with traffic overlays, you get support for media, which includes now Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. But press the favourite star here, and you start to see some more interesting stuff. There's a really neat audio tone interface, and of course, access to the car's surround view camera. Press this button here and you get live telemetry showing the car's current ride height and suspension activation, and when you're in sport mode, there's a little red smartie that moves around illustrating the current G-force loadings on the car. It's really cool, but pretty useless. The rest of the dash, though, is carried over from the pre-update ML class, so it's not as modern and fancy as, say, a C-Class or the all-new E-Class. There are some nice touches like the stitch dash and leather treatment in the doors that make the GLE Coupe still feel a little bit special. The seats have got great bolstering, but do feel perhaps just a little bit firm, and I've had trouble getting into just the right position despite the electric adjustment. Now, you still sit up high. You can actually raise it even higher if you like, thanks to the air suspension, but the swoopy roofline, and particularly with the optional sunroof, it does make the GLE feel a little bit lower than the wagon. Now, the steering wheel is a really nice AMG one, which includes these metallic feeling paddles. This car, the 350D, has a long list of convenience and safety technology, from heated seats to the full suite of Mercedes' Distronic driver assistance tech. So here we are, the GLE Coupe. Well, it isn't impractical, it isn't cramped, it isn't wanting for gear, but enough about what it isn't. Let's find out what it is. Well, under the bonnet of the GLE 350D is a 3-litre turbocharged V6, which has got 190 kilowatts that come on from 3,400 RPM, but 620 newton metres of torque available from just 1,600 RPM. So it means you've got a good amount of response out of the big SUV, whether you're in stop-start city traffic like we are now, or out in the countryside. It's got a really nice level of response. Mercedes claim the 350 engine will get a combined fuel consumption cycle of 7.2 litres per 100 kilometres, which is actually pretty accurate. We've run this thing around town and we sit just below the 10 litre per 100 mark, but on a highway cycle yesterday in particular, it was sitting below 5 litres per 100, which is actually really impressive given this car weighs 2.2 tonnes. Being a sports SUV, the GLE Coupe has 4 different drive modes accessible to you. You've got the usual comfort and sport, then there's a winter mode for basically low traction surfaces, and of course an individual setting where you can decide on which of sport or comfort you'd like from your steering, your suspension and your engine throttle mapping. In comfort mode, as we are most of the time, it can feel a little bit doughy. You've got a very aggressive stop-start system, which does help keep your fuel economy down, don't get me wrong, but you feel it kicking in almost all the time and it's just a little bit slow to wake up again when you need to get going. Of course, if you're like me, you're just going to chuck the thing in sport and see what it does. And to be honest, you do get a lot more response out of the engine. The car feels, well, sporty. The start-stop system remains on, but it is just a single click to turn it off. But the issue that I have with sport, the car lowers itself a little bit. It's on airbags all round, and you find it's a little bit jarry and sharp over some of the bumps. But there are some bigger issues with the ride of the GLE Coupe that we'll get to in a minute. So to change gears, you've got Mercedes' excellent 9G Tronic multi-clutch, not a dual clutch, multi-clutch transmission. And, because it's, again, a sporty SUV, we've got paddles on the steering wheel, which if you do put it into a forced manual mode, allow you to change the gears and feel like you're actually doing something. It is actually a pretty good gearbox. You've got the column shift, which does take a bit of getting used to. We say that every time we're in a Mercedes, but once you are, it makes it a very, very fluid movement, particularly when you're in parallel parking, because you can switch from drive to reverse without really taking your hand off the wheel. But it can be a bit slow to react in that sort of circumstance. So it's best to sort of get used to the Mercedes and sort of learn how the gearbox is going to work for you. But if you are running the car in sport mode and you are changing gears yourself, in that circumstance, it can actually be quite a fun car to drive. As soon as the roads get a little bit tighter and you start to need to brake more or put a little bit more steering angle on, the car starts to show its weakness. It is not a tight hill climb car. This is a grand tourer of sports SUVs. We mentioned the ride in the GLE, and there is a constant sense of movement in this car because of the airbag suspension. Now, it is geared for comfort. You do not feel that you're crashing and bumping around poor surfaces or uneven bits of road. And when you are in sport mode, it does tend to tighten up. The car feels quite sure of itself and secure. But there is this constant sense of movement within the cabin. We showed you earlier the little red Smarty that moves around showing the G-forces in the car. And you can see that even as we're driving at a relatively sedate city speed on a well-paved urban road, there's a constant amount of movement in the car as we are sort of floating a little bit on our airbags. So if you're looking at this in comparison to, say, its arch rival, the BMW X6 for the better driver's car, the BMW's kind of got it pegged there. The Mercedes just doesn't feel quite as sporty focused as it really could be. Now, being the coupe body shape, you really do have hampered rear vision here, particularly if you've got passengers in the back. Luckily, the car has blind spot detection systems. Now, the other little issue that we have with the GLE is the way that it stops. As I said, this is a 2.2-tonne car, but it's a very soft and almost spongy feeling on the brakes. You've got these massive cross-drilled rotors at the front, so the hardware's all there, but the feel just isn't. Now, it's okay around town. You don't really notice a need to pull up sharply in this sort of traffic, but if you are trying to push this car a little bit more sportily, there's just that little bit of lack of communication. You can jam on the brakes and the car will pull up, but so will your passengers, and I don't think they're going to enjoy it very much. Now, in typical Mercedes fashion at the moment, there are a lot of options and personalisation choices that you can make when you order a car. There's 11 colours, for example. You can option up things like a black pack and different wheels and other trim elements, but the core GLE 350 comes with everything that you see on it today. In fact, the only option that we have is the panoramic sunroof, which is about $4,000. And really, that's the way it should be. Personalising your car through options is a great way to do it because you really want the base car to be the base car. Being a Mercedes, and as we said, this has got the full Distronic suite of driver assistance tech, which includes the kind of low-level semi-autonomous mode of steering assistant, which works really well. I've had this down the freeway a couple of times. You put the Distronic cruise control on, it does measure your gap, and it does keep the car in its lane. And we've got to say, again, that it is one of the best systems available on the market. It's smooth, it's intuitive, and it really does work really, really well. Now, this car, the GLE 350D, starts at around $122,000 in Australia, in Australian dollars. Now, that pitches it a little bit higher than the BMW X6 30D, which would be the equivalent vehicle, but it does come with more kit. The BMW, as we've said, is probably the driver-focused car. Maybe this is the style-focused car. The kind of sports coupe SUV for the discerning driver in all of us. So what do you reckon? Style over substance? Whichever way you look at it, the GLE Coupe is still a pretty good car, regardless of whether you want a sporty coupe or a sporty SUV. But like its wagon sibling, it's caught between generations and does suffer a bit for it. Some of the elements around the cabin, its handling dynamics, and perhaps a bit of overall polish could use some improvement. But that said, I've been driving this thing around for about a week now, and you do notice that people look at it and then look again. It's an impressive car. It's a statement car. It's something for people to look at and talk about, and that's part of its appeal. And if you like that, well, then the Mercedes-Benz GLE Coupe might just be the right mix of squashed wagon and raised coupe that you need.